Apologies on, I guess, the IT back and forth, but it's a pleasure to be able to join you all, albeit remotely, and talk about the work that I've been doing on this area of what we call useful fiction. And the starting point for it is that there's a challenge that every person faces when they're pitching an idea to an audience. And whether the audience is a business audience for a contract proposal, to a military audience for a certain program, to even the work that you're touching on in your event today. And in fact, it's a challenge not just in pitching ideas and proposals, but it's also whenever you sit down to write a report or a memo advocating for something good or warning of something bad. Now, this idea was encapsulated in the 9/11 Commission, and what it laid out, it described how we faced back then a failure of imagination. That is the ability to bring together complex ideas and understand the reality coming out of them. But there was an associated problem that we don't voice as much, which is not just merely the failure of imagination and analysis, but the failure of communication. That is, you have one challenge, which we typically talk about, which is how do you identify, how do you explore some new trend, some new technology, some new risk that you face. But the second part of making that case for change is how do I communicate new, complex, and sometimes disruptive ideas? That is, how do I deal with the problem of I'm constantly competing for both mind and media space in my target audience? And not just that, how do I get them to recognize, to not just understand the area of change, but also act upon that area of change? Now, we've all faced that in lots of different areas, and I've certainly had that in my career. And one way that we've utilized to go after this recently is called useful fiction, or sometimes popularly known as fictional intelligence. And it's been used by entities that range from the US and Australian and British military, NATO, to Fortune 500 companies, universities, to it's been featured in media like NPR and Economist and The Wired. And what it is it's the deliberate blend of nonfiction research and analysis, but packaged not in a traditional memorandum or white paper, but shared via the tool of narrative, that is character-driven storytelling. So you can think of it as a hybrid of narrative and nonfiction, or another way of thinking about it is it's a hybrid of entertainment and education and explanation. Now, I need to be careful to clarify not just what is useful fiction, but what it is not. We're not talking here about science fiction, which obviously, I love my science fiction. It's had a huge amount of influence on the real world, but this is not, for example, the equivalent of after 9/11, when the CIA invited in, it said, okay, we had a failure of imagination. So they invited in a group of science fiction writers and Hollywood writers to advise it. Now, with no grounding in terrorism or Al-Qaeda, they dreamed up not potential terrorist plots from the real world, but instead movie plots. That is, they weren't grounded. The flip side is this is not what's sometimes thought of as futurism. The point is that you can pull from that real world side, but you also still need that narrative, that scenario. Another aspect of useful fiction that differs from the futurism or the design or speculative fiction side is that it sometimes might not be about the future. It might be about communicating something today, trying to figure out more effective means to share complex real world research. Now, to give a story that illustrates this, in my career, I've written a number of nonfiction books on topics that range from robotics to cybersecurity, and they, have had various amounts of influence. But the project that ended up having the greatest effect in my overall career was when I turned to story to share research. And this was a project called Ghost Fleet, and Ghost Fleet was this hybridization. It was a novel about what a war between US and China and Russia might look like. But it was also a package of research. It was a novel with 27 pages of research endnotes, following rules, and that everything from every single bit of technology in it had to be drawn from the real world to the various types of tactics that are used in it, to even quotes that the characters say provide the footnote, hey, here's how someone said it in the real world. And what was interesting is the book, it sold well, but what actually happened was it turned out to be the most influential work of my career. I was invited to share the real world lessons of it, everywhere from the White House Situation Room to the Nobel Institute. The US government had 3 different investigations to keep things that happened in that book from coming true. In turn, it launched a variety of projects to make things that happened in that book come true, including a $3.6 billion ship program that was called Ghost Fleet after the book. Now, as an aside, they gave me $0 out of that program, so I need a better lawyer. Now, useful fiction, though, can come in a variety of different forms. As mentioned, it might be a novel. It might be a short story. As an example, we were asked to do this for the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, to take the executive summary of their report. It's a 138-page report. Take the executive summary and turn it into a short story that shares its key ideas in a more engaging manner. It might be taking briefing memoranda. For example, we did a series of these for the National Commission on AI, helping to set the scene for the kind of important conversations that they were going to have. Useful fiction might also be something that is visual. It might be a visualization of a fake document from the future. It might be a visualization of a fake poster from the future. It might be a graphic novella. And again, the point in all of these is that it's not just dreamed up. You're starting with the original research, the original memoranda, and just figuring a way to try and share it in a story-like form. Now, it can also be created by different groups. Sometimes it might be commissioned, where you hire creative professionals to do it, or you might pull in volunteers, or what's known as crowdsourcing. So entities that range from the US Marine Corps to the Atlantic Council have done this. They've put on the table a real world problem, a real world document, and said, hey world, come up with stories that will help illustrate this. So what is it, though? Let's get back to the walk side of things. What is it about story that makes it so useful? There are 4 key attributes that the research shows. The first is studies from fields that range from cognitive science and psychology to national security policy have found that repeatedly it's an equal or often more effective means of conveying new or complex information. Basically, by placing facts within what are known as synthetic experiences, it puts it in a framework that enhances the impact of it. We can experience, so to speak, what the research is telling us, as well as feel, so to speak, its effects. Now, the reason behind this is the way that our human brains have evolved. Story, it's the oldest communication technology of all. We've been using it to share ideas, dating back to when we were gathered around fires in a cave. By contrast, as you see here, PowerPoint's essentially a generation old. Of course, our human brains aren't tailored to take it in that way. And what's really interesting about that is a couple of things. The first is there's been studies that have found that more parts of your brain connect to narrative than they do to conventional presentation of information. When you read a story, 4 parts of your brain engage with it if you're hooked up to a brain monitor, as opposed to a memoranda, only 2 parts of your brain hook up to it. Another interesting aspect comes from one of the earliest studies in the field of psychology, the 1944 Hyder study, that found that what's cool is we can't even help ourselves. As humans, we put stories on top of information. So in this experiment, they showed people essentially a film that showed random movements of 2 triangles and a circle. And then they asked people, what did you see? And repeatedly, they said things like the triangles are chasing the circle, or the circle is sad because the triangle's going after it, whatever. What was fascinating about that project is of the entire test group, only 1 person didn't put a story on top of the random movements of the shapes, and that was the person that was certifiably insane. Now, we deployed that into a recent project that I think that is relevant to the interest that some of you have there, which is a project that the nonfiction title of it was AI Visualized. It was trying to understand the various different ways that AI and robotics are going to be used in our world, and what are some of the core dilemmas of it. Now, it was a 3-year research project that involved everything from deep dives into the science to interviews of subject matter experts to pulling up Amazon research papers. But we shared it not through, again, a conventional white paper, but instead we packaged it into a story. It's a novel that identified essentially the 300 things that we thought people needed to know about AI and robotics. Everything from, okay, how are the police, to how is Amazon planning to use it, to what are concepts like algorithmic bias. But we built the story around sharing those ideas. And just like that experience with Ghost Fleet, the same sort of thing happened. We were able to, sell the fiction story to Hollywood, but more importantly, you should see here a list of all the different real world entities that range from the U.S. House of Representatives to I was able to brief President Biden himself about AI and what comes next. He wasn't yet president, but the point is that we got in there because we had framed it in a different kind of way. Now, the second value of this is narrative hits emotion. And as everyone from politicians to used car salesmen know, emotion is usually what causes people to act more than just seeing facts on a bullet point. And so if you can bring in emotion, it's a way to take that research and lead people to utilize it in a certain way. This points to the third value proposition of story and its application in terms of making it useful. The ask. As I noted again, it's a problem of not just doing the analysis and framing it, but it's how do I get people to actually read it? Story is a different kind of ask. It has a lower barrier to entry. I gave you those examples of, you could have your 130-page report on cybersecurity, or you could frame it in a story. And this is true not just for whether you're trying to reach a general audience, but also whether you're trying to reach general leaders. The way to think about it is it's a parallel of what parents like myself do to our kids. We sneak fruit and veggies into their smoothies. In this case, we're doing it for policymakers. So we're identifying what's important, but trying to share it in a way that they are excited to reach to adults who are tired of white papers or tired of PowerPoints. I'll give you a more specific example of how this worked. The Australian government had on the left-hand side, you should see there was a white paper put together by some of their top experts working over the course of 6 months about all the different reforms that they needed to bring their education system and align it with their national security needs. Obviously, a very important report, and 6 months of work on it. It didn't strike with the effect they needed. And so they reached out to us, and we took that report, we identified its 3 key themes, it's 37 key nonfiction insights. So what are the fruit and vegetables that they wanted to share? And we turned it into what you see on the right, a short story called Eye for a Storm that has those themes and insights, but woven into a story that follows a student as she goes back and forth from school and present and near future to an exciting episode. It's in Jakarta in the wake of a tsunami, etc. And the point is, by reframing it this way, we've tracked it so far. We've had over 15,000 readers of Eye for a Storm, but even most important, the readers included the head of the entire Australian military, as well as 6 current or recently retired US 4-star admirals and generals. Those numbers, that level, is not normally what you're getting for Australian education white papers. And this links to the last attribute of story, connection and distribution. Again, this goes back to who we are as humans. Humans connect over story. When you meet someone new, when you reconnect with a friend, with a family member, often you end up sharing about a story that you enjoyed, whether it was a book that you're reading, a movie that you saw. In fact, one of the interesting things is we connect over story even when we hate it. We like to talk about movies or TV shows that we just saw that we didn't like. And so what we're doing, and let's flip that. No one, I think, in all of human history has ever said, man, I just saw the best PowerPoint. It was so awesome. Let me share it with you. No one ever said to someone else on vacation, sitting by a pool, man, this is just the best academic white paper. You would love it. And so what we're doing is taking advantage of this sharing and using our target audience to distribute it outward. Now, let's go back to the second aspect of what they've asked me to speak to you about, which is not just the value of story, but how can we do it? And to go back to the notion of a smoothie, you can't just throw anything in there. There's got to be a recipe to it. And so when you're building story, there's various attributes to it. But in many ways, I think of it as the equivalent of telling a joke. That is, there's some people who are just natural born comedians, you know, a Jerry Seinfeld. But there's also the ability to learn how to tell a joke decently. You won't be Jerry Seinfeld, but you can tell it. You can learn to tell a joke. And my evidence of that is I've seen Bill Gates tell a joke. I don't think he was a natural born comedian, but he told a joke effectively. And as I'm going through these attributes of how do you do narrative, I think what is also important to draw from this is that these apply not just when you are trying to build a potential fictional narrative out of your research work, but also it applies in terms of the next time you're building a speech or a memorandum or whatnot, because narrative doesn't have to be false, doesn't have to be fiction. It can be a story from a time in your life. It can be a story in terms of the application of that particular technology. It can be a story about a user of that design. So as I'm going through these lessons don't just apply to the world of fiction, but basically let's hit these. What are the elements of building a good narrative? The first is to always ask yourself, who is the ideal reader? What is the target audience? Where is that target audience? What form is most likely to connect with them? And how can you show that you understand their world? In addition, what are the emotions that you are seeking to trigger in that target audience? Too rarely we build our stories without going through those types of questions. And so again, that's everything from, let's go to the example of form, and where that target audience is. That should shape the length of your, again, whether it's your story or your memorando. Who are you trying to reach, and where are you trying to reach them? Are you trying to reach them during the course of their work week? Are you trying to reach them when it's a weekend? That changes, for example, the word count length that you might go after. Next lesson. In story, there's no value to bottom line up front. There's no value to giving away what you are trying to present. You need to instead take that audience on a journey. So too often we give everything to the target audience. This is the key points I want you to know right at the start. And so what do? They tune out. Or even the worst part is when people ask to see your PowerPoint briefs before you get there, they read them and then they go check their email during it. So do not give away the story. Do not give away the highlights of it beforehand. No bottom line up front. Instead, your goal is to get them to the end of your story, which means that you want to take them on a journey with a series of stages in it. Another measure of a good narrative is that it has characters, and characters of depth that we want to follow through both ordinary and extraordinary circumstances. So in joking terms, if you're a Tom Clancy fan, I like to think of this as the Jack Ryan rule. It's the difference between early Tom Clancy, where you had this great compelling character, and frankly, late Tom Clancy, where it was just, two-dimensional. And so when you're building these characters that you want to follow, it also means that the character and the resultant story has to be one that faces a worthy adversary, a worthy challenge. And when I say adversary, it might be an individual villain, it might be a set of circumstances that they face, but in narrative, the best villain does not tug at their mustache and get beaten with one punch. Same thing when you are presenting your design solution or your research. If it is something where it's like, oh, this is simple and easy and it's so obvious, that's not compelling. And frankly, that's also something that doesn't match the real world. Real world story, real world circumstances are complex. And so your challenge, your villain, has to reflect that kind of complexity. They have to be up to it. A next aspect of this, every narrative has a good setting. That is, your goal is to drop someone in a place that is both imagined, but it feels real. It's recognizable, but also as you're thinking about the setting of your story, whether your story is I'm building a fiction around a future terrorism incident to I'm building a story around these are the circumstances in which a customer might find use in my design. You need to have that setting serve a purpose, and you have to think about what is that purpose, and going back to earlier, how does it connect to the emotions that I want them to receive? So let's give an example of arguably the most cliche of these. It was a dark and stormy night. On one hand, that is a cliche. On the other hand, with just one sentence, you've taken that audience into a place that they can imagine. You've given them a kind of emotion that you're trying to achieve. So I'm not saying use it was a dark and stormy night, but rather what I'm saying is whenever you're telling a story, think about the setting in a way that both feels real. You want your audience to be there, but also what am I trying to have my audience feel? Let me give you a different example of this that shows this in application. We had a project where we were asked to help communicate to a set of business leaders. It was a C-suite of a major corporation and their board, the needs to take security around cloud migration seriously. That sounds really exciting, right? And I can tell you that the white paper on cloud security migration, it was really, really compelling. And so our way of trying to help them understand the importance of cloud security migration is instead we crafted a story that was from the perspective of the CEO and the chairman of the board of this corporation 1 week after the company had been hacked in a ransomware incident. And it wasn't them going through the sense of being hacked, but rather the setting of the story was they're riding in the back row of a commercial flight. And if you recall, the reason is, CEOs, when they're flying to Washington, D.C., and CEOs can no longer fly in their private jets when they're going to meet with Congress. And it was this way of putting the CEO in a visualization of both the cognitive and intellectual sense of what might happen to me if we don't get this right, if we don't take security seriously, but putting them in the synthetic environment of physical discomfort. And so the story is from the perspective of a CEO riding in the back of an airplane, tight, cramped seat, as they think about, how did I get here? What were all the off-ramps of decisions that I could have, should have done to keep me from being in this circumstance? And through that story, it was a way of sharing the concerns on cloud security migration that the technical team wanted to portray, but also in a manner of, hey, CEO, take this seriously if you don't want to have an experience like this. Another part of this and that idea of them sitting in the back row is every story, every presentation needs to have tiny details that do most of the work for you. As again, we like to think as nonfiction folks that it's the bullet points, it's the facts, it's the data that will carry through. Same thing when we're doing our executive summaries and the like, but consistently what target audiences take from it, whether it's a movie or when we've pulled transcripts of people debating inside the White House on military deployments. It's repeatedly the detail from an anecdote that carries through. A great example of this is John Wick's dog. So if you're familiar with the movie series around John Wick, it's the story of he's the ultimate killer. And over the course of 3 movies, he probably kills a good 2,000 people. He's a former assassin, and he barely talks throughout it. And yet, somehow, he's the hero of the story. And the way they've achieved that is his dog. because there's basically a moment where John Wick, this awful evil villain, we find out he has a dog, he likes his dog, and his dog likes him. That's the detail that somehow shapes our entire perspective around them. So the point is, when we're building our narratives, what is that detail that we use to sort of carry forward? So to go back to that example of cloud security migration, CEO, you need to take it seriously. The tiny detail that we had was the CEO not just riding in the plane uncomfortable, but as they're thinking, they have in their hand the plastic of airplane water, and the CEO is thinking to themselves, not only how did I get here, but my God, I'm not on my plane. I can't even get the kind of soft drinks or whiskey that I want, and they won't even give me a normal cup. This stinks. And so this feel of the cup in their hand is to convey the powerlessness that we want that CEO to feel if they don't take the real world technical measures that the security team wanted. Close of this final lesson. Every story needs to have an ending that brings it all together in some way, shape, or form. The master of this is the Twilight Zone. And again, the ending needs to be something that connects back to the goals that you have and the thematics, but it doesn't just have to bring it all together. It has to bring it all together in a manner that the audience couldn't guess at the start of that story, the start of that memorandum, the start of that speech. And, for those of you that are familiar with the Twilight Zone, it did this in lots of different ways. But I think the perfect example of this, my favorite episode of this, is one that was called All the Time in the World. And All the Time in the World it tells the story of the guy that you see on the right. He's kind of this nebbish guy. He works in a bank. He's not very good at his job. His boss is always disappointed and screaming at him because what he keeps doing is he's not really interested in banking. He keeps sneaking off to go read. And essentially, he's on his way to losing his job. And we follow him then as he goes down into the vault, and he reads down there. And while he's down there, though, nuclear war begins. And he comes back up out of the vault, and everything's destroyed. And he starts to walk through the city. And, there's ruins and there's no people left. And he realizes that he's maybe the last man, not just in this city, but maybe the whole of a library. And there of books. And this little lonely guy looks at these piles of books in the middle of the apocalypse, and he gets a smile because now he has all the time in the world to read. But that's not the ending. He reaches down to pick up one of those books, and his glasses fall off, and he accidentally steps on his glasses. So now he's caught in this world where he has all the time in the world, all the books to read, but he can't do so. And so I don't have all the time in the world. I hope that this was useful to you in some way, shape, or form in sharing both the value of story, but also potentially some of the approaches to using story in your own work. And I'm going to try and take it off share screen again and see if our visuals are working. And if not, we'll just get Q&A. And I can see you. If you go up to the microphone and ask your questions or comments, that would be fantastic.
So we have a mic here. Whoever wants to ask questions, please come to the mic so that Peter can hear you. Yeah, just go ahead and line up if you have a question.
What about concern? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Concern about the potential bad players reading your books.
So a couple of things. When we do our books that are in the national security space, and again, we've done these not just on national security. You know, we did one that it wasn't a book, but it was taking a white paper on explaining quantum technology. It was a 31-page report on quantum technology that they wanted senior leaders to read. You know, bad news for the scientists, senior leaders, whether they're in a C-suite or they're university deans or they're defense ministers, don't like to read 31-page papers, and they definitely aren't excited to read them on quantum technology. And so in that case, we turned it into a series of stories that sort of explain the vocabulary and key terms of quantum, not through here's your glossary of it, but following a story of it. So the first is it doesn't always have to be national security issues. The second is we never work in this space on classified material because of that concern. And so anything that we're utilizing is already out there. It's also being, if it's either us doing it when we're doing our books, here's the footnotes to see it. So a Russia, a China already knows that this is the cybersecurity vulnerability. Here's the to document how it's out in the real world. Here's to document how they or we have already utilized it. Or if we're doing it on behalf of an organization, the starting point is their white paper. So they're the ones that have decided that it's okay to have it out there. So that's how we avoid the concern on giving anything away. Now, what has been really interesting to me is to see how adversarial nations have responded to some of the books and projects. We had as an example, People's Liberation Army, the newspaper of the People's Liberation Army in China did a 7-page review of our Ghost Fleet book. It was a book review written by a Chinese military colonel. And what was really interesting about it is, so first is there was an English language 2-page version, but they had a Chinese language 7-page version. And so we were able to get the 7-page version and translate it. And so there were parts of that were different, but the 7-page version, what was really interesting is the colonel essentially for 5 pages of the review, he really liked it, and he kept talking about things that he liked, and he clearly engaged with the characters or whatnot. It was only at the end that he kind of realized that back to his position, and then he started to say things like, aha, this depiction of a war between US and China shows that that's what the Americans want. And clearly the writers of it, Peter Singer and August Cole, have been secretly paid by the US military to try and foment war between US and China. So he kind of had to end it on a propaganda note, but we were happy we got him at least on. He liked the first 5 pages, so yeah.
That was a very interesting presentation, because I've been telling everybody that every paper writes a story. So I'm coming from the excuse me, academic writing perspective. So our question, a challenge always is that how do we get the reviewers to see the story, and how do we sneak in the real stuff into the smoothie, and then they can actually see what the contribution is. But I was thinking about another genre of there are 2 genres actually. One is Henry's short stories. If you remember, they always had a trick ending, if you will, in the end, a twist about the gift of the Magi and all of that. The other one that I was thinking of was Columbo. That the detective series. Remember, the thing about Columbo was that you knew who the murderer was. Right at the beginning, they showed the crime, and then the whole episode is about how they resolve it. So I was, what is your comment on when we write academic papers, we write an abstract at the beginning. So that's like the crime has been committed. And so the rest of the paper, we try to convince them, well, this is how it was. We arrived at that conclusion. So I would like to hear your opinion about that.
Great question. So for this, I'm going to put back my hat on as, PhD nonfiction, and hopefully we'll do something popular in the room and say, man, our academic journal system is broken. It is broken in so many different forms, from the submission process to the review process to, in most fields, the expectation that you have to pay to gain access to academic research. So overall, it's broken. To your specific question, so there's a couple things. The first is, now there's a division if you're doing what I call useful fiction, where you are taking the nonfiction and sharing it in an overall fictional scenario. To put it bluntly, right now, there are some academic journals that will accept it and other academic journals that won't. It's just too new to them. We had a funny experience of this recently. The other part of academic journals is the reviewers, often, frankly, they're often grad students. Who do we get to sift through all the stuff? We get, the grad student to do it, who may not be the one best equipped to evaluate. But we had a funny experience recently where an academic journal rejected this. They, at the end of the day, said, you know what, we can't do this because we don't think anyone will read it. And it's actually since been published in a journal that, in a more popular journal that's had 50,000 readers all the way up to the head of the U.S. military. And so, we're like, okay. But what I'm getting at is, first is it actually useful fiction overall? Some will take it, some won't. That's just what it is. Okay, but now let's get to, it's a more conventional nonfiction academic research that you're presenting. So even within that, I believe as a writer, too much of what we submit, and in turn, what I read in academic journals and when I used to review for them, there was not enough time taken in the craft of writing. Going back to this notion of my goal is not just merely to dump data on you, but my goal is to ensure that you receive that data, understand that data, and are persuaded by that data. And in fact, that you want to, in turn, share that data with others and use it in other places. So in the creation of it, as I said, even if it's a standard, I'm sharing research, it should have examples of application that have characters in them, and the characters can be a real world person, or it can be a scenario of, here is, we have this new finding, this new medicine that has these results. Tell the story of its potential application. Tell the story of what it was, how it worked out for that case. What's the small detail that will convey, etc. Then you got to the part about the ending aspect of it. So again, the goal is not always to have a twist ending. Like, and you hit some things that I love, as you noted, that, the twist ending that surprises people in crime shows or the like. What I'm getting at is the ending needs to be something that was not purely expected and could be understood and read without reading the rest of it. A different way of putting it is, in academic writing, almost every conclusion is written in a manner, and again, I'm making a blanket statement, but I'm pretty confident in it. The conclusions read like, and I'm done. Get the hell out of the finish the article, as opposed to a conclusion that not only draws it all together, but takes us into new places, unexpected places. And so again, I just bluntly, on the academic journal side, there's not enough thinking around how do I share the data in a manner that's going to be compelling. To your last point about the approach of the Columbo and this starting with the knowing the crime that already happened. Actually, there's been people talk about this in writing workshops. The hardest writing of all, the hardest to pull off, is after the gun has been fired. What I mean by that is the easiest writing is to, set the scene. The robbers are about to go into the bank, and then they come into the bank, and then they rob the bank, and the gun is fired, as an example. The hardest writing to pull off is the story starts in the wake of the bank robbery. And those are just really stylistically tough to pull off, but they often are sort of the most effective, because you take the reader on a journey that sort of moves across time in an unconventional manner. We've done, I'll give a different non-Columbo example of this to help you. We recently had a project which was with an organization that has a strategy document reflecting their research about what they think the world is going to look like in 2040 and the measures that they need to take to make their organization more effective for 2040. And it's obviously a very important document. It reflects a lot of research on their side. The manner that we turned it into a story scenario is it's actually written from the perspective of someone in the organization at their retirement ceremony in 2040, as they look back on their career from 2020 to 2040. And so their looking back is a way of sharing in a novel manner, here's what that organization thinks is going to happen. Hopefully that aids in a certain way.
Well, Peter, let me follow up a little bit with this idea of academic writing, where, clearly we're to provide the facts, sometimes the facts and only the facts, but clearly with fiction, you've got a point of view. I mean, you're expressing opinions, grounded on the facts, but clearly somebody could say, well, that's the wrong way, the wrong point of view, or a wrong impression of what the data says. I mean, how do you sort of deal with that, particularly in an academic sense, where somebody says, well, it's important that you just present what the research says?
So great question. And that goes back to the discussion on what is it that you are trying to share with that target audience. In some situations, it is, I am just trying to share the, as you put it, the raw data. So I'll give that example of the research on quantum technology, how it works and what are its applications. That was the original source material. And so in that case, the goal that organization had was they just wanted the target audience to understand what is quantum technology, how does it work, and what are our applications of it. And so the story was framed around that. And to be clear, again, so you are not saying this scenario, this story is the definitive future. Instead, it's not, you're not even claiming that it is a future. The people reading know that these are imaginary characters. What you're trying to get them is to understand the glossary of quantum, what is a qubit, or here's how quantum encryption works. So, but you're doing so rather than saying, and now you will read 2 pages on the definition of it and a glossary of it. Instead, in that case, you got it as we followed a character. They were, and that's one of the stories was following it was a hunt for a terrace in 2035 through the catacombs of Paris. And along the way, quantum technology is being utilized, and it's defined in the course of that story using their real world definitions, but it's sort of blended in. So sometimes your goal is just purely explanatory. Other times, the goal is it might be warning. And so in that case, you paint a picture of a future that is bad, that people don't want to have happen, with the idea that the reader goes, so you are warning of these trends, let's play it forward. This is what it would look like if it happened. Ooh, that is a world I don't want to be in. And that's a good example of a similar thing can be said about intelligence material on the governmental side. The best intelligence predictions, the best intelligence analysis are the ones that don't come true because they caused action to prevent it from coming true. Other times the goal may be the opposite. I am showing, I would like you to take this and I'm trying to create something. I'm trying to make something happen. It's a proposal within our organization, whether it's a certain kind of reform to we want you to buy this product, whatever it is. And so in that situation, you're doing the opposite. You might create a world that shows, okay, this is what it would look like if we implemented this reform, or if you had this kind of system. These are the possibilities that it would create for us, with the idea that the reader goes, ooh, now I understand why we ought to do this reform, or why we ought to buy system X. I want that future. We don't have it now. What can I do to make that happen? So again, the goal, you understand what your goal is, and then I'm going to repeat again, in no way, shape, or form are you ever saying this is the definitive future that will happen. That's not what the utility of this approach is. It's instead, I'm trying to take those nonfiction elements. And oh, by the way, you still got to have the research and notes, and it has to be used in the real world way, et cetera. I'm trying to share that in a manner that is different than the white paper. And I know I'm beating up on white papers and the like, and I need to be clear. I write them too. I write academic journals too. It's just a manner of getting another bite at the apple is the way I think about it. Whether we as individuals or organizations put a massive amount of work into research, a massive amount of work into white papers, and yet we just kind of dump it out there. And so what we've repeatedly found is that you can, one, in creating them, even if it's just nonfiction, pay attention to the story that you're trying to tell, when I was talking about those 7 elements. And 2, you may be able to achieve a different kind of bite at the apple by also creating a fictionalized framing of that research or that reform.
Peter, this is Matt Malarkey, co-chair of our conference this week. And I do want to tell you just how much we appreciate all of the ideas and actually all of the application that you shared with us today. In particular, I think, from my perspective, it was wonderful that you remind us of the villain. I think that's certainly applicable in design science research, that we spend time educating our readers, right, on the difficult, wicked problem that we're trying to investigate and not just gloss over it. I really appreciate as well your idea that in addition to this villain, we have to describe the rich setting, because I do think it matters in context, and I think we find some of the best work. I think we also have a venue in the case study, particularly in discussion case research that we use in teaching environments, to actually employ many of your narrative techniques, because that's where we can tell a story. And we probably have an opportunity as a Desirous community to combine more of the case study research to supplement and co-reference our more academic, if you will, white papers and journal papers. And so I think everything you've shared with us today is a wonderful reminder of the power of a story, but it's also a wonderful way for you to share with us many of the elements that we might already be thinking about, but not incorporating as effectively as we'd like to in the work we do, especially if we want it to be memorable, especially if we want people to read it and remember it. So, Peter, what a wonderful presentation today. On behalf of Desrist, we would maybe give you a round of applause.
Thank you very much, and in turn appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And if people have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Again, you know, I feel a little bit like Oz hidden away through IT reasons, but it should have on the screen there a way to reach out to me. Good,
and please consider yourself part of the Desrist community from now on.
All right, take care all.
Anywhere.